I'm not nervous doing the children's story, but I'm very nervous today. I'm not usually nervous, but this is, I don't know, this is something that I want to do right. It's important that I stay focused and just, it's hard. For the first time I actually wrote stuff down, and as I was writing it down, I was feeling more and more guilty that I'd had this blessed and charmed life most of my life, and God wasn't really in it for much of it. So I want to be able to do this testimony as honestly and as humbly as I can. And I know I'm amongst friends, I've been told, but I'm still nervous. And I don't want to sound like I'm talking about myself. I don't like that. I can do the children's story, that's all right. But I don't really like sounding like I'm talking about me. So it hasn't been easy, and it brought up lots of past mistakes, wrong decisions, bad decisions, and things that hurt other people in the process of my life. And I guess not too many people would be standing up here at going on 75 and giving a testimony of just found God. I mean, really? I think that most people would be doing this at a lot younger age. But I was really blessed. I was born into a big, loving, noisy, Lebanese Catholic family. I grew up believing and knowing that I was loved. And not everybody can say that. And I'm really, really aware of that. So there was not a time that I didn't feel that I was loved. My family were really passionate and they were caring. They were Catholic, but now that I know about Christianity, I realise that they were Christian. It was an open house. I came along when the family were living. I was the youngest of 7. My eldest brother was 18 when I was born. The closest to me was a sister 7 years older. Very spoilt. I was spoilt by all of them. Except for my youngest, the sister, who decided that she'd be the spoilt one, so she wanted to drop me off the balcony upstairs for a while, but I smiled at her and thank God I'm still here. So when I came along, things were a lot easier in the family. So we lived in a big house, a big, sprawling, 8-bedroom home. It was always full of people. I just remember being full of people. I remember the rosary being said in Arabic on Friday nights. I think it was Friday night, which is quite unusual, but Friday nights, and then everybody sharing food. So in a funny sort of a way, the Lebanese Catholics kept a part of the Sabbath. It's quite weird, but it was always Friday night. And it was always vegetarian food because they didn't eat meat on Friday. Because, you know, you could die and go to hell if you ate meat Friday. So I remember the house being not just full of family and friends, but my dad had a habit of bringing home strays. I used to bring home stray animals. My dad would bring home, we used to call them stray people. I can remember a Jewish refugee living with us for a while. I can remember a Polish Catholic that had fled Poland living with us for a while. I can remember an English couple that had come from England and were working with the Air Force that couldn't find a home immediately with their son. I remember them living with us for a while. It was always, and then there was a Mr. Barry. I don't know where Mr. Barry came from, but he lived with us till he died. I don't think he had any family. So this feeling of reaching out and including all people, I was blessed to experience. Also, my grandfather, 2 of his closest friends who were Lebanese, one was Jewish and one was Muslim, and they would play cards and they would fight. But they would always embrace and always hug each other. So my understanding was that everybody was the same. I can't remember ever hearing that Protestants were bad. My second eldest sister married a man that wasn't a Catholic. I can't remember anything in our household being a worry for either my father or my mother. They just knew him as a good man. And he chose to honour the Catholic upbringing of his children, so they weren't worried. So in many ways, I didn't have a problem growing up, and I loved my Catholicism because I was surrounded by Catholic people who were good to me and kind to me. I went to school, and it was an old Catholic school, of course, taught by nuns. One I detested, and the others I really liked. Again, I loved this, I loved the Mass. It was said in Latin, that's how old I am. And we sang in Latin, and I loved the songs. That's why it was really difficult for me to pick a song for my baptism, because most of the songs I knew were about Mary, and I thought she was pretty cool. So, you know, Steve actually asked me to write a short thing about how I came from Catholicism to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I'm struggling with it, and I haven't done it yet, but maybe after today I'll be able to make sense of it and write one. So we were a big couple, you know, I went to Mass on Sunday, I went to confession, I kept the holy days of obligation, so did my family. My life was charmed. I was the little flower girl for my eldest sister when I was only 3, and then another sister, like all my brothers and sisters, started to leave, and then I had my choice of rooms, so they won't be taken up by other people. But then my world came crashing down. When I was 12, my father died. So I shouldn't have been angry, but I was. I was angry because my charmed life was sort of, that's not what was supposed to happen. By this time I was an auntie to about 5 children, the eldest only being 5 years younger than me. And I remember he was 7, and he came to me and said, "Auntie Lulu, why are you crying and why are you so angry?" And I said, "Because my father died." "That's your grandfather, Philip." He said, "Yes, but he's everything's okay. Grandpa was a holy man." Jiddi was a holy man, which was the Arabic for grandfather. And I just did not think back. All this time of growing up this good Catholic girl, I thought, nah, no way. And at the age of 12, I just almost decided there wasn't God. There just wasn't a God, because God wouldn't allow that to happen. So I was confused, I was afraid, I was angry. And I guess I was a pretty acting out 13 and 14-year-old. My mother applied to turn our big house into a boarding house, a guest house, because it was so huge. And by this time there was only myself. I don't even know if my sister Irene was there, but that wasn't approved by the council. It was called a residential zone. So my father had owned hotels with other men in partnership, and we ended up moving into the Royal Hotel when I was 14, because to hold the licence you had to live on the premises, and the people that leased it had left, and this was an option for my mother. So this is what happened, and it was a life that I never knew. It was not big enough to have the great big family gatherings and all the family being home at Christmas, and so life was different. But I quite enjoyed it because I wasn't noticed as much. So I went off and did my 14-year-old and 15-year-old things, which were wrong. I hung with people that weren't the friends that I'd made at school. I hung with people that were probably hadn't had the same morals in their life that I'd been brought up to think were right. Anyway, by the time I got into trouble so many times it wasn't funny, and I was about to leave to go to stay with one of my sisters, my second eldest sister in Auckland, where her and her family had moved to. and continue my hairdressing, because I had left school at a young age and started hairdressing, which I'd actually been doing before I left school. Family were disappointed because they always thought that I'd go on to school, through school. And just before I was ready to be sent off to the sister, I met a man from Australia. I was 3 weeks away from 16, and that man became my husband. So I got married. I just was terrified about leaving home because I'd always been surrounded by people that supported and loved me. But his family had come out for the wedding and they were absolutely delightful, so that appeased my mother somewhat too. And I moved to Australia. We were only going to go for a year. However, I was very Catholic and I didn't take the pill. I thought I was very Catholic. I did lots of other wrong things, but I wouldn't take the pill because I might die and go to hell. So I didn't take the pill. So 11 and a half months after being married, at the age of 18, I had my first child. By the time I was 20, I'd had my second child. Not in my plans, but God must have been looking after me because it was the best thing to do. Very soon after that, when I wanted a third child, I had a series of miscarriages. So praise God, I had 2 healthy children. We had decided that we would return. I decided that I wanted to return to New Zealand when I was actually pregnant with my second child. I don't think my husband, in fact I know my husband only did it because I wanted to and I was homesick. So we went back to New Zealand, and while we were there, his brother was killed in a motor accident and he was only 22. I always say he was a good brother. David and his youngest brothers were typical country guys whose life revolved around sport and the pub. Anyway, Roger was killed and it was quite a tragic thing to happen. And my darling mother came to me after about 8 weeks after that happened and said, "Darling, you're going to have to go back to Australia. David needs to go home to his family." I have been blessed with 7 children who are still living, and I have 17 grandchildren right now. Tanya is Dorothy's only grandchild. She's only got 3 sons. 1 is dead. There's only 1 in Australia. You are pregnant with a second child. I believe you should go back. And she was crying, and I was crying. But that was the sort of mother I had. Maybe that explains how I've always known about unconditional and generous love. Because, of course, she didn't want me to go back to Australia. It was hard to travel in those days. So we returned, and my husband's, I realise now, he was probably depressed. And everything changed, and I know that it was the right thing to do for my husband's family. They were overjoyed. She loved to knit, she loved to crochet, and she had this little girl to do it for. And thank goodness, because I couldn't do any of it. In fact, I was allergic to all needles of any description. I could go with one that went in me, but not one I had to actually handle and create something. So I became a countryman's wife. He'd grown up on the land. His family had sold the land that moved into the small country town into a big house. The boys were all given a small plot of land. I knew nothing about any of this. All I loved was the animals, so it was a very difficult thing for me to see lambs, what do you call mules and all those sorts of things. But I adjusted. I became very involved in the community. I became very involved with the Catholic community. Our church was, I don't think it happens very much now in the churches, but at that time it was a community. My children went to school there in a small Catholic school called St. Pat's, and I was on the auxiliary. I had wonderful friends that I made for life and are still my friends to this day. Life revolved around sport. My husband played rugby league, I played basketball and squash. When my son was old enough, he played tennis. He was in point score at the swimming pool. He played squash, and he played Australian rules and rugby league. So life was busy with sport. My daughter read books and she's still reading them. But all of this was very much, again, I was charmed, you know. I'd do things like, it was all around parties and get-togethers after the sporting events. There was presentation balls, presentation dinners. It was alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. And the only reason that I didn't do it is that I had a liver that didn't process alcohol, so I got very sick. I had my father's genes, who owned hotels but couldn't drink because he got ill, so I couldn't drink. But that didn't mean to say that I didn't take part in all of the fun, what I considered fun times. But if I look back now, it was full of alcohol, often cannabis. I think there was a bit of other stuff around that I don't know of, but a crowd that I thought was so glamorous, who were older than me, at the host and hostess ball and the bachelor and spinsters ball and all of these things. And it was all something, what does it say in the Bible? The best I can say is reveling. Because I thought when I read that word in the Bible, I thought, aha, I may not have drank, but I did revel. So this was very much my life. Just one of, having fun, and I could always manage it because I had in-laws that always looked after my children. So again, you see the pattern? I loved my in-laws. Blessed, blessed, blessed. Fun, fun, fun. And then my sister-in-law and myself decided we'd open a shop, women's fashion shop. That was a lot of fun too. And we'd go to Melbourne and we would meet all these people that we'd have to buy fashion from. Most of them were Jewish. Along, I think it was called Flinders Lane is where all the shops were. Again, I just revelled. I loved it. But I'd go to confession, so if I did anything wrong, it'd be forgiven. And then during this time, a dear friend died. She was only 28. Her family were Christian, Methodist Christian. And I remember going to see her not long before she died. She had 3 small children. And I said, oh, this is so wrong, I've been saying the rosary for you and this is so wrong, you've got 3 small children. And she tried to tell me that it was okay, and I refused to hear her. It wasn't okay. So I think that was the first time I pulled back. I pulled back from God completely. I decided it was all wrong. And soon after that, I decided I'd go to university and study. And I decided I'd study welfare because I really believed in reaching out to people. I believed in all those things. So I ended up getting a degree in what was then called a Bachelor of Welfare Studies. I wish I could tell you that this was all going to be a big change for me. First job was as a sexual assault counsellor with mostly adolescent kids. Of course, this just increased of course there's no God, because this wouldn't be happening. It was something that was so alien to me, I don't know how I coped. To be in such a sheltered upbringing, and even the fun that I had in the revelling, this was unknown to me. So, of course, there was no God. So I just went on my merry way, leading a rather godless life. Continued to come back for the BNS balls and all the others. Still involved in committees, etc. Work. And then during this time of then leaving the adolescent sexual assault team, because I would get so angry with the court system. I can't believe it. I can't believe the things I used to say. I used to go, bloody hell, if there's a God, why is this happening? All these things now when people say, I want to be able to give the right answer to. But when that sort of stuff is thrown in your face, it's like, no, there can't be God. It's just wrong, wrong, wrong. So during this time, I lost another friend. I lost my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and I couldn't pray. I couldn't pray for any of them. They were just going to be dead. I didn't quite know what was going to happen or what was going on. And then later on, while I was working this life, I then became an adolescent family counsellor, and my hours used to be really late. So I would be up late. I'd have people that I'd have to see after work. So I'd be up really late, and then I'd hit the wine bars with a friend. And I'd be at the wine bars till 2 o'clock in the morning, go home, get up for a breakfast meeting at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and do it all over again. So I wish I could say at this time, and I felt I was doing good. I was doing good things, I was getting families back together, and I was. But I did none of it with God on my mind. I went the other way. I studied Jungian astrology, numerology, did Gestalt therapy, looked at Buddhism. Maybe that would give me answers. Because all this time I think I was looking, and then I decided there was a goddess and it was the planet. So, you're seeing someone up here that you might think was always God. And I got that initially. But most of my life I think was godless. I really do. And I wasted all those blessings. Then something happened again, and I ended up going, my sister, who was closest to me in age, was diagnosed with cancer. And I decided I should pray. But anyway, then I found out that it was all through her body, and praying was a waste of time because she was terminal. So I took off to New Zealand and spent 3 months with her before she died. And it was horrible. And I prayed, I went back to the prayers I knew, which was the rosary and other things. And when she died, a horrible death that should never have happened, that really cemented there was no God. Then 10 weeks later, my mother died. Mum died in faith. I know she died in faith. But I still didn't believe it because she was such a good, beautiful woman, and she died very peacefully, I might add. But it was just a waste of time. So how I handled it, I threw myself into work. And I was nearly burnt out. My husband at this time was diagnosed with, he always had rheumatoid arthritis, but he couldn't work anymore. He was hemorrhaging from the drugs he was taking. So I decided that the best thing for him, because we were living very separate lives, most of my life was in Albury, our house was in Holbrook, and I had another small flat in Albury. So we're living separate lives. I was still doing the wine bars and other things. And I knew it was wrong, and it wasn't going to be good for our marriage. So anyway, long story short, we ended up moving to Moonee Beach in Coffs Harbour and had a wonderful life. I was earning huge money, so it was okay. I could pay the house off, I could do all that thing, but my goodness, did I work. And I worked and worked and worked, and I threw myself into everything. And I think that was because by doing that, I didn't have to face anything else. Certainly wasn't going to be interested in God. And then, after a period of time, deaths started to happen again. And in a very short time, I lost 2 very, very dear friends. A brother, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and just before he died, 18 months after diagnosis, my sister, my eldest beautiful sister, died 10 days before. Now, praise God, I actually turned to God. Isn't it crazy? Why does all this stuff have to happen before us? But I did. But I could only turn to him in the way that I knew. And again, the only way I knew were my Catholic prayers. I did pray outside that, and I had a dear friend that sent me prayers. But I did go through a period that I thought, and then I had to put my little dog down after 16 years. So I thought, right, I'm not playing anymore. I'm out of here. I'm going for a swim in the Rip. I know where it is, and I know how far out it'll take me. And I walked out onto the beach on a particular day, all decided to, on the way back, I thought, oh, there's the Rip. I could go for a swim right now. Nobody on the beach. And I thought, oh, I can't do that because they'll think I'm killing myself. I better go home and put my swimmers on and a cape, look like I'm going for a swim. So off home I trotted, put my swimmers on, got a towel, got my bag, walked back to the beach to go for the swim in the Rip. And my shoulders were really bad, so I knew I couldn't swim against it. And just as I decided I would go in, I got up to about my knees and it was cold. And a wind came up and I thought, ooh, this is too cold. I might wait for another day. And I went home. And when I went home, I had a rogues gallery down the hallway of all my family's photos and photos of Mum, photos of my children, photos of my husband. And I just stopped in the middle of the hallway and I burst into tears and just said, God help me, God help me. So I think that was the beginning. That was the beginning. And I don't need to say what happened much next, except to say that I ended up in Mooloolaba. And I came and I was living with a dear, dear friend who was an ex-boss, Janine's father actually, and a darling man who I love dearly because he supported me all the way through being in New Zealand with my sister when she was dying. And he was unwell. And then he died, I think less than 2 years after I was there. So he kept me alive through COVID, I think, because there was nothing else. So I'm very grateful to him because the Rip was looking interesting again. And then you know the rest. So after he died, I was in a very black place again. And along come a friend who saw that I was in a dark place and gave me the right prayers and gave me courage and taught God, reminded me that I could surrender myself to God, reminded me that I wasn't alone and that all I really needed was God. But I didn't know how to find him or where to go. I knew I needed a community to help that. And I didn't really have one. So when I came here for the first time, and I know you've heard this, and sat there at the back and didn't want anything to do with any of you, there was a beautiful presence here that I felt. There were people that oozed love and goodness. There was a sense of community again, and as I was struggling to make my way into finding the path that I would take in finding God, I was still reading about Buddhism and read the Book of the Death and the Dead and all those things while this was happening. And then I finally picked up the Bible. And I read it really quickly because that's what I'm like. Beginning to end. And then none of it registered, of course, because you can't read that fast. And then I did it slowly. And God loved Nathan as I would be going. It's just like the Catholic Church. It's full of patriarchy and da-da-da-da-da-da. Off I'd go on a tangent. And he really helped me. He really helped me. And I still struggle with some things. Don't think I'm like, oh. And I can't quote the Bible. I read it all the time. But I can't quote it. But I believe I know its truth. And for that I'm grateful. And that's sort of my testimony. I don't even know if I've written things down. Oh, just that I wasted so much. I travelled all over the place. I had a husband that said, you go. I can't come with you, but go with your friends. 4 months I travelled overseas. I was so blessed. I was just always blessed with people that loved me. My friends loved me unconditionally. My husband loved me. He was far nicer person than I am. He might have drank too much, but oh boy, he was nicer than me. So I just like to say that here I am. I'm going to be 75 in October. I guess it's never too late. And I'm so grateful for God for never giving up on me. And I'm so grateful for those early years, Catholic years, but I'm grateful for them because it did teach me a foundation. And then I was able to bring that foundation here and make sense of it. So, God bless you all.